everybody. Welcome to The Map, the Mental Health and Addiction Podcast. I am Andy Bernstein, your moderator and co-host, and we are a podcast dedicated to discussing mental health and addiction in an open and honest way. It's an important topic and one that is affecting 1 in 5 Americans. We have a great guest today, and joining us will be Joanne Peterson from Learn to Cope. But before we get started, we must meet the other members of our esteemed panel. Let's welcome Willie Drinkwater and Kristen Perry Long. I'm going to let each of them tell you about who they are, because they can do it better.
Bottom of the list. What did I do?
What?
I dropped to the bottom of the list. What did I do?
Oh, well, you're back up. Okay, tell me who you are.
I'm Chris Perry Long. I am a recovery coach, advocate, and family educator for Aware Recovery Care, which is a 52-week in-home treatment program. It's amazing. Reach out if you want to learn more.
And you are a dedicated parent of 2 children that are currently in recovery.
Yep, and this particular guest is near and dear to my heart, because I will share briefly, if I get able to have a word in edgewise, why she is near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, this is like the dinner table when everybody's going for the food all at the same time. It's like a free-for-all. All right, and let's also welcome the great Willie Drinkwater, who is a great expert in the field. And Willie, who are you? Tell us about yourself.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Yeah, Willie Drinkwater here. I've been in long-term recovery for quite a few years and stuff. I'm an educator for UMass Boston in the Addiction Counseling Education Program. I'm also a board member of MADAC, Mass Association of Alcohol Drug Abuse Counselors. I have a private practice where I work with people that have addiction and co-occurring disorders.
And you are a former comedy writer?
Former comedy writer. I go back to the days of WBCN, The Rock of Boston, 104.1 FM.
The Rock of Boston.
The morning show, the Not Before Breakfast Big Mattress Players with Billy West, Charles Laquadera.
There you go. And so let's get started. And before we start the conversation with our special guest, Joanne Peterson from Learn to Cope. We're going to talk about an article that our executive producer, Mike Weber, sent over this morning. And it's about the opioid crisis roaring back in Alabama. And there's the article. And in reading the article, it was funny because I also looked at what was going on in the New York Times. So obviously this is making its way back into the news. But over the last 6 months, since COVID-19 brought the nation to a standstill, this comes to us from the New York Times. The opioid epidemic has taken a sharp turn for the worse. More than 40 states have recorded increases, including Alabama, in opioid-related deaths since the pandemic began, according to the AMA. And in Arkansas, for example, the use of Narcan, an overdosing reverse drug, has tripled. In Jacksonville, it has seen a 40% increase in overdose-related calls. In March alone, York County in Pennsylvania recorded 3 times more overdose deaths than normal. So my question to you guys is, are you seeing this in both of your worlds? And why do you think this is happening from your perspective?
Chris, you want to take it first?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah. I think, it was, we're in a period now, it reminds me of 9/11 where, for a month or two, people were numb, and then all of a sudden they started to have feelings and anxiety and depression. And I think we're at that stage with the pandemic now too, where people have just had enough, and they're looking for relief, and it's not good out there. I mean, alcohol is jumping up in addition to opiates and stuff too. So, yeah, but I think it's it's a maladaptive way of trying to deal with all the stressors involved with the pandemic going on. The pandemic, not to mention the election, which we won't talk about for too long. That could be a whole show unto itself. But
you're not kidding.
People are afraid too of what's going to happen at election time,
It's a stressful time, no doubt.
Very
And
stressful.
I actually listened to Brene Brown. I don't know if you ever listened to her. She's great. And Brene said her last podcast was about the surge capacity, that there was somebody who she had on talking about the surge capacity and how everybody's kind of hit a wall right now.
Yeah.
This like we've all been running on adrenaline for a while, and usually we have a way of just like for a couple months we can keep going, but I think everybody's kind of hit a wall.
Yeah, and the more adrenaline you get released, the more it's beating your body down. So yeah.
Chris?
Willie and I just talked to you yesterday because I've got so many people in crisis right now, and it's not like your normal crisis. It's like your helter-skelter crisis. Like everybody's going like in 96 different directions as opposed to like either using or not using.
Yeah.
Now it's like using and it's just everything. I don't know. I mean, it's overwhelming, but Willie said the same thing. He's like, everybody's hitting that COVID wall, it's like enough is enough.
Yeah, it's funny. I do another show, and I was with my co-host my host yesterday.
Chaos?
I said co-host or host, and like something happened, and like he just went off. Like it's like I was like, dude, you are wound way tight, and I think that's a lot. I mean, my wife works at home. We're all. There's a lot of togetherness. There's a lot of togetherness, and
yeah. Have you had those moments yet where it's just like you or she will just all of a sudden you just turn and snap, and then you go, oh, sorry, and then you have to go for like a 2-mile walk just to
exactly,
burn it off. Yeah.
Exactly. Let me get out, and then the dog starts barking. Anyway, enough of me. But this is a big problem, and we're going to talk to somebody who is on the front lines of this, and we're going to dig deeper. So let's welcome Joanne Peterson, the founder and executive director of Learn to Cope. The reason I said Joanne McDonald, because I actually used to work for a Joanne McDonald, and that went in. So I apologize. Joanne is the executive director and founder of Learn to Cope, which is a nonprofit peer-led support network, which was established in 2004. They have helped thousands of parents and family members deal with loved ones who are addicted to opioids and other drugs, opiates and other drugs. So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. And it's so funny that you called me Joanne McDonald because that's my mother's maiden name, McDonald.
See?
Must be psychic,
so I come
Andy.
from a huge McDonald family, so that's kind of funny.
See?
Yeah, EIO.
See, right? So I'm not that far off. Well, you guys, Willie and Chris, Joanne. So I'm going to let you guys kind of talk to her about who Learn to Cope is, or what Learn to Cope is, and the great work that she's doing. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
So Joanne, do you remember the first time we met?
I do.
It was at the hospital in Brockton.
Yep.
In the basement, and
Yep.
I came with a friend.
Yep.
And I figured there was going to be like 10 people, and the room was packed. And your son shared his story, and I felt like he was a fly on my wall in my life. And I was like, this is exactly what I'm going through. How can somebody else go through this? And then you hear all the stories, the grandparents, the aunts, the moms, the dads, the husbands, the wives, they were all there. But what got me, and I get goosebumps to this day, it was a Thursday night meeting, and there was a family, and they had come in late. And before we closed the meeting, you said, I'd like to take a moment of silence. We have a family here that lost their son on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And I just I had to pick up what you were putting down, because it's what changed me. It's what opened my eyes to understanding that we can't do this alone.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was the first time I met you.
Yeah. I remember that night like it was yesterday. Yeah. We were all kind of, sadly that's still going on, obviously, within our groups almost every week. And it's something you never get used to, but it's a tricky thing, trying to make sure when you're in a room full of people, or right now on a Zoom call with pages of people in crisis, and when somebody or two people lose someone in 1 week, you just have to deal with it and just say, we have to stop for a moment. We've lost 2 people this week, or we've lost 1 person this week. And it's self-care for us and for our facilitators is huge because, like you guys said, frontline workers like Chris and myself and you guys and Willie, you're hearing a lot of trauma and you're in that moment, like in real time. And you just want to make sure you're doing the right and saying the right things and not re-traumatizing someone. And, when you have a room full of people that are there because they're in fear, because they're afraid this is going to happen, and then they're hearing about it happening, you have to be very mindful of both of those populations, because now you've got people, it might be their first night and they're scared to death because they just heard someone passed away. And you want to make sure they continue to come so that we can help them. So you have to almost explain to them, like, I'm so sorry, this is your first meeting. If you're here, then you know that this is the reality of what we live. We can assure you, you'll hear hope too, as you become used to coming to our meetings. So it's really kind of it's like balancing balls sometimes, like just making sure everybody leaves there feeling better than they did when they came in. And a lot of times when someone loses someone, we're the first place they want to go because that's their family. That's the people that have been helping them all along. And, they need to let their family know that we won't be here anymore because our daughter died. And then they feel displaced. And it's just really crazy what this epidemic has done, to families like Krista's and mine and so many thousands and millions of others around addiction, let's face it, has been around for decades, hundreds of years, really. But this opiate crisis has just ravaged so many.
Not getting any better either.
No, it's definitely not.
So-
although you're out there, I keep hearing the words, there's no longer an opiate epidemic. And I have to raise my hand and say, yes, there is. But I think what they're trying to do is say it's not just opiates, it's many other drugs, which is true. But I say, I raise my hand every time and say, please don't say that it's over, because it's not.
So tell us about Learn to Cope and kind of how it all got started, because, for our audience out there, it would be great to, you're doing such amazing things. Let's talk about kind of the origin of how it got started and what you're currently doing and the programs you provide.
Sure. So it was sort of an accident. I didn't know it was going to start. And now that it's been, reflecting back now on, the almost 20 years, really, I've been dealing with the opiate crisis, 16 of them being Learn to Cope, but it's really more like 40 something years, because I grew up with a lot of addiction and mental health issues in my family as a sibling. I lost a brother. He passed in 2011, and I have a sister who, has severe mental health, schizophrenia and alcoholism. So as a little girl, I was always running around with my mother trying to figure out how to help them. And, my brother would be in and out of jail, incarcerated from the age of like 18 up into his 50s. And it was just, his main issue was addiction. But he would do these things and end up, violating and going back. And he ended up almost institutionalized, I think, because there was no real talk about how to treat somebody. It was more like the hidden thing. It's not something you were supposed to really tell anybody about, even though everyone knew because it was in the newspaper that he robbed a pizza truck. But and he was the nicest, sweetest person ever. And everyone loved him, but he just had this horrible issue. But anyway, long story short.
If I can interject, Joanne, too, I think it's amazing how we've gone from the point where we've been, hiding it and it was, you don't talk about it, to now you see in obituaries where parents will say, my son, my daughter had a long battle with opiates,
All the time, yeah.
The one big fear that I have now with the pandemic is I'm starting to see on the North Shore, I'm starting to see a return of stigmatizing people with addictions. It's like,
Yeah.
if it's not the COVID and quote medical, even though mental health is medical, there's this, I mean, I actually had a client that tried to get into an emergency room, and he actually recorded the security guards telling him to get off the campus. They didn't have time for mental health because the ER was full of COVID and stuff. And it was a hospital that had a crisis team too, and the security guards wouldn't even let him access the crisis team. So, I mean, I just hope that we're not getting back into stigma again,
Well, I think you're touching on something that I've been seeing too, Willie. I mean,
Okay.
Totally in the stigma again, because what happened is COVID removed substance abuse, right?
Yeah.
No, we don't have any acts anymore. We only have COVID.
Yeah.
Now we're re-entering it again, and our train in the public eye came to a screaming stop when COVID started.
Yeah.
And there's still people behind the scenes that are working hard and trying to make that difference. But how many Zoom meetings can you do to make a difference? How is that going to be impactful? Where, the boots on the ground doing the differences they're not as active as they used to be. So the stigma has reared its ugly.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that I'm trying to do now, I'm trying to be more cognizant myself. I very rarely, use terms like addicts and alcoholics. I'm really trying to get that focus on human beings with a substance use disorder.
Yeah.
And I'm teaching that to my students too. It's like, the second you say addict, alcoholic, you're labeling somebody, you're categorizing them. And they're much, much more than their addiction. They're much more than their labels. So, I think that's important.
So, Joanne, let's go back to finishing, because we got off point. Shocking. Shocking.
Sorry.
Shocking. You're in trouble when I'm bringing everybody back.
Today, Andy, like you're going to make us stay on point?
I know, it's amazing, isn't it?
What is this?
Have a re-shirt on.
All right, go ahead, Joanne. Continue about learn to cope.
Yes.
So just to make a long beginning short, the days of a young kid growing up in little Randolph, which I think, Willie, you grew up there too, right?
Yeah, no. I was a Connecticut guy that came up to go to Merrimack.
Oh, okay. Why did I think you were from Randolph? There's Drinkwater's from Randolph anyway.
That could be, yeah.
But anyway, years later, I had my own kids. And, I used to say things like, I'm going to be so open. I'm going to talk about marijuana, alcohol, and I'm not in recovery. So I'm someone that will have an occasional glass of wine. But my husband never drank because he did years and years ago. But he quit drinking because of diabetes. So it's not something we really had a lot around in the house. But, camping trips and stuff, there would be alcohol or whatever, but not to a huge, crazy extent. But anyway, I would, talk to the kids about alcohol and marijuana. And I would say things like, this runs in our family, you have to be very mindful and this and that. And then, my son graduated high school, and that's when the big OxyContin boom was happening, although none of us knew that. And it was the year 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And, he quickly changed from one person to another in a very, very short period of time. And I was thinking about schizophrenia because going back to being, a young girl with a sister with those symptoms, before we knew what she had, she would be up all night, sleeping all day. She drank a lot of alcohol. She was, very talkative 1 minute, and the next minute very quiet and depressed. And that was really what I was seeing with him. But what I didn't know is it was because he was using heroin by the time I figured out what was wrong with him. And that looks very similar, really, some of those symptoms. I see Chris nodding her head because that's what we'd see. So there was really no smell of alcohol. So I wasn't thinking, I had never even heard of OxyContin, never heard of it. I knew heroin was always an issue in the 70s. I didn't know that people could snort it now. And I just didn't see this coming. And then I brought him to, one day I said to him, are you okay? Like I brought him, he was getting sick a lot, kind of like flu symptoms, what I didn't realize were withdrawal symptoms. And then I remember one time, bringing him to a clinic because I think he's got bipolar or schizophrenia symptoms coming, you know, from what I remembered as a kid. And, you know, he went in, now he was 18. There was no health insurance anymore because we didn't have Obamacare yet. So once there was no health insurance, you know, you paid for everything. Once someone was 18, obviously he wasn't working because of his addiction. And he went in, he came out in like 5 minutes. And I wanted to go in with him. He didn't want me in there with him for obvious reasons.
Right.
You know, because he was 18 now, really. I'm thinking it was like, no, he was hiding his best friend, which was his addiction. And then he came out with a prescription for lithium and sleeping pills. And the clinician came to me and said, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is he has bipolar disorder. The bad news is he has bipolar disorder. And I was really confused by that. And he said, you know, at least you know now, you know, I'm going to give him something so he can sleep at night because he's not sleeping. And then the lithium will help his chemical disorder. So I was relieved and I was just like, oh, this is great. You know, now we know. And, you know, I felt like at least I had like solid information and now I could learn how to help him. So I was relieved about it. And then obviously things got way worse after that because mixing these drugs is not a good idea. So
Lithium and sleeping pills.
Pills and heroin, which I did not know about.
Right.
I did not know he was using heroin. So that was tough. Long story short, we realized, you know, all the symptoms we hear about happened. And, you know, by 2004, 3 years later, we were at our wits' end because, again, no health insurance. It was very hard in those days to get a bed. Once I knew what was wrong, I had gone to a local meeting and I had raised my hand in desperation, saying, I need help. And as soon as I started talking, the hand went up like this. And I was like, okay. And she's like, this meeting is not about your son. It's about you. I was like, no, it's not. It's about him and he's going to die. I need help. Can you tell me where I can bring him? And it was like, we don't do that here. And I just got up and walked out. That meeting today would be great for me because I know I need to take care of myself. I know this and that. But when I was in pure crisis, I needed resources, information, education. I needed help. And there was nothing. And then when I did find a bed, you know, you hear this all the time. You think that first treatment center is the last. It was far from the last. You know, 3 and 4 days, and then they'd be home again, and then you have to learn the hard way. Like back in those days, Chris says boots on the ground. That's what we were. Right. We had to find all this out on our own. There was no Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter or podcast. There was nothing. It was more like kick him out. And that's all you can do. And I'm like, no, that didn't work for Jimmy, my brother, or Marianne, and I'm not losing my son. I'm going to do something about this. There has to be something that I can do. And I didn't want to end up back at Concord State Prison visiting him, which I ended up doing. But anyway, and it wasn't Concord. But so long story short, all that was going on. And then finally the big one, he gets in big trouble, ends up arrested. It gets into the newspapers. The old stigma begins that I used to. Why
in the newspaper? Was it?
He did some, he's, you know, involving stealing, you know.
Okay.
It ended up in like the little local newspaper, you know, the big news of the day. And then the stigma begins. And it was all about what he did. It wasn't about why. And, you know, I wanted to kill myself. Literally, it traumatized me to a point of no return almost, because I think after so long trying to help him without any help from anyone else, really. I mean, I would pick him up at a detox and I'd be like trying to ask him questions and they'd be like, we can't, there's HIPAA laws, we can't talk to you. And it's like, well, nothing, you know, no, just, you know, no signs and symptoms of relapse, no, like, you know, he had go to Al-Anon, which was fine, but I needed more than that. And it was like, I didn't even know about how an overdose happened. That was really something I should have been talked about. But anyway, once
frustrated.
And once it went in the newspaper, that was the dangerous part for me personally, because I was either going to kill myself or do something about it. And I'm telling you, I thought about it because I thought I can't go back to Sundays at the jail. And that's where I was headed. And it was like, you know, being dragged back to the abyss for me. But then
Childhood stuff from your childhood too.
Family of origin. Yeah.
it was actually what you'd call today is re-traumatization.
Okay.
I was already a traumatized person, which I didn't even know then. I know this now. But then that happened, and that almost sent me over the edge because it was just so hard. But it actually, in a way, it turned into a blessing because it lit the fire in my belly. And I thought, you know what? These people are going to talk about this in the newspaper, but there's a whole other side to this. There's kids all over the place using these pills that no one knows about. By then I had kind of learned about them and was researching it and this and that. I came out like a lion, and I called the news and I was like, we got a real problem here. And I felt like I had nothing left to lose. He was in jail now, you know, bright future, you know, and I felt like it was tanked, like it was over. So I thought, I have nothing else to lose here. I'm just going to talk about this. So, and I did. And from there, I just, more and more things happened. I ended up at a DA event and standing up in front of like 200 people. And I still have it. It's like, I wrote everything I was going to say on paper. And then when I tried to read it, I cried all over it. So the ink like was, it turned into this blue mess, and I just threw it. And I was just like, this is what happened. This is what's going on. Nobody's talking about it. We're losing people. I'm hearing from parents that have lost their kids that no one even knows why. It's just died suddenly at home. And once I did that, it started getting out into the news, and all of a sudden I just started hearing from people from all over the place. And like I said, there was no Facebook back then. It was more like
grassroots.
Cut out an article and mail it to a friend. And I ended up like speaking all over the place. And my son actually, that helped him helped him getting away from the drug for a period of time.
How come, you think?
Well, you know, cold turkey really was a rough time for him, obviously. Not the best way to recover, obviously, but back then, that's what happened. And he started getting his feelings back after a while and the remorse, like, I can't believe what this has done to me. And you know, I started talking to him. I'm like, well, you're all over the newspaper, you know, you might as well talk about why. And he's like, you're right. So we kind of did that together a bit. And today he's long-term recovery. He's gone on with his life. I don't like to really talk a lot about his story anymore because he has a right to live his life now.
He's not just
anymore. It's about families. It's about, I will say this though, you know, people in recovery, I feel are like the best people you could ever meet and learn from, because they, you know, after they get through that and they find recovery, they are the ones that are out there helping, you know, the others, you know, getting out of that hole. And, you know, like I said, he found that, and he has he has his life, you know, and wonderful person, father, husband, you know.
It's great.
But today, my role is really not to be about what happened to me or my family, but about how do we help people cope.
Other families. Yeah.
Great segue, because you know, it sounds like you've really taken this experience of yourself and really turned it into a calling, where you almost like became almost a pioneer in a sense of you know, being somebody in a time when there was a lot of stigma, or there was more stigma now than there is today, but you basically took it upon yourself, or your experience, to help others. So having said that, tell us about you know, the origin of Learn to Cope. And I'm going to let Willie talk to you about your programs and from a peer recovery. But tell us about the process of how Learn to Cope got started. Like how did it form?
Well, I remember when Joanne and I were on the Consumer Advisory Board at BSAS. I think it was only for 3 or 4 months, but it was during those 3 or 4 months I was hearing you talk about, I'm trying to put this group together and stuff. And I knew you weren't long for the Consumer Advisory Board after that and stuff, because you were gung ho with it the whole way and stuff.
Yeah. Well, it was, why? Because that was the first time when I started connecting with other parents that I started feeling better as someone that literally, had been traumatized for so long, for so many ways, and then having it happen to one of my own children. I really needed that. I needed those other parents just as much as they needed somebody to kind of help get something going. So it was healing for me, really, is what what Willie was seeing. And I didn't like a lot of the bullshit stuff. The stuff drove me nuts. And I'd have to be like, bottom line is this, I don't want to hear this, and this. I want to know about this. And that's what I just kind of tried to do. And I don't know, I guess what happened was I just did it. I just called the superintendent in my hometown and I said, can I have a room at the school, and he's like, sure. And, that first night there was probably 40 people. And then we had to keep moving. It kept getting so large that I had to keep finding new rooms. We went from Randolph to the Stoughton Police Station. Then we went to Brockton. We would have 100 people in the room every week.
Wow.
They were in line outside trying to get in. And what it was I allowed them to ask questions of each other, not me. I wasn't the guru. I was just the organizer. I never wanted to be the guru. I wanted to have people work with me. And one of the best decisions was to add education. So let's have guest speakers to educate us. And I learned some funny lessons along the way. The favorite guest speakers that we have are people in recovery. So what a Learn to Cope meeting now, and what it always has been, is people should feel better when they leave than they do when they came in, and they should have support, education, resources, and hope. Hope is one of the most important things. You need hope to know that sometimes they can find their way out, but we have to find our way out as far as staying healthy mentally and trying to be somewhat prepared for whatever is going to happen, because we can't fix everyone's loved one. We can only be there and help them through the journey, and that journey might not end in a good way.
Yeah.
Right.
So, we do hear from people that have lost their kids that say, I'm just glad that I was a part of Learn to Cope because I was somewhat prepared, and they have a circle of people at least before they move on to the grief groups that are out there.
Yeah.
We're a Narcan provider. We teach overdose prevention. We train and give out Narcan even through COVID. We train online and we'll deliver it to people or mail it to them.
I think your organization is vital, because coming from the perspective of a therapist and an educator too, I often say that that the friends and family end up more insane than the person using does, because the person using is medicated. We're not medicated against them, and people don't know what to do. They're more insane than their loved ones that are out there using.
Yeah.
I have a question. How does I'm looking at your website right now. You have a ton of meetings. You've also expanded to Florida, it looks like. But my question to you is, how do you differ from an AA meeting? If I'm in the audience and I say, okay, well, or an NA meeting, how does it differ?
Well, it's very, very different because we have guest speakers that come and educate us on the science of addiction, on overdose prevention, We have book authors come and speak to us. We've had people in recovery are our favorite. We also train on the signs and symptoms of overdose, and we literally are a pilot for the Department of Public Health, Bureau of Addiction Services. So we give out free Narcan, which is it's nasal naloxone, which is an overdose reversal medication, not even a medication, antidote. We also have on our website, we have a discussion board with people who join from all over the country, really. Some are from out of the country, and it's very private. It's not like a social media where people are putting their life out to anyone and everybody. It's very, very, people, everything's free and confidential. People register only because we want to know that they are a family member, that they're not just looking at this to learn about our family member.
Right.
And then, crosstalk, like when you go to other groups, if you hear somebody talking about what they're going through or what their son or daughter or spouse or whoever they're there for did to find recovery, someone might want to ask them a question, so they'll raise their hand and they're allowed to ask them a question. So we're not like, and it's not all about one person at the front of the room. We welcome other people to be facilitators. So we're always adding new, fresh, it's not about one person. Learn to Cope is a huge team of people. I don't do any of this myself. I might have designed it.
No I in team. It's a team.
Exactly. And I mean, we have like 200 facilitators, but we look for we listen for good listening skills, someone that doesn't have all the answers because we're not gurus, we're peers, and someone that can speak up and say, oh, okay, we need time for the next person. And then they sit back, and we're doing the same thing on Zoom, which it was quite a challenge getting all those meetings up. But like our Florida group, totally just like the groups here. It's just people coming together. They're not tied to treatment centers. They're just people. And then they're actually attending our virtual groups so what we did when COVID happened is all of these meetings used to be in a space where you walked in a room, right? And then COVID happened. Some of our meetings, there's 60, 70 people, or there might be a meeting that there's 10 or 20 people. So COVID hit, we knew we couldn't have in-person meetings, and it was like, oh my God, how are we gonna do this? So our team, which is amazing, got together, and all of our regional managers, and we started learning Zoom together first, and just practicing and just learning everything we could about it. And then it took us, I think, 3 weeks. And then by the end of March, we were like, Learn to Cope is online. So what we did was, I'll use the example of Western Mass. We have Holyoke, Springfield, and Pittsfield, which is, if you drove between those meetings, that's a couple hours of driving. We combined them all together in one meeting. Rather than trying to have 25 groups online Monday through Thursday, we wouldn't have been able to do. So we took all of the regions and combined the meetings. Like North Shore, we have Salem, Gloucester, and Ipswich together. We have Cambridge, Franklin, and Fort Lauderdale together on Mondays. We have like New Bedford and Attleboro together. So, what we've done is combined them, and what's happening is even more people are joining now. We're getting more people from out of state. So it's almost in a way a little scary because it's like when we are able to go back to in-person, I'm not sure what that's gonna.
Yeah.
I think you're gonna have to continue those Zoom options because there's nothing like this anywhere.
I know, and I think that's probably what we'll do.
You've got Al-Anon, but Al-Anon is very book worthy. It's got an agenda. And
Plus, you don't have the crosstalk either, usually.
Right. And Learn to Cope it's not shooting from your hip, but it's shooting from your hip. It's meeting the families where they're at. Not, okay, today's October 25th and we're going to discuss. Oh, no. You know what? Today's October 25th and who's in crisis? Let's talk about it.
Right.
So the families are welcome. So if I understand correctly, the families are welcome to come along with? Okay. So that's the big difference, right? I
The
mean,
person struggling with the addiction?
yeah,
No.
no.
We ask that they have one solid year of recovery, no matter what their recovery looks like, whether it's medically assisted recovery or 12-step or smart recovery, that doesn't matter to us. We don't judge that. But we do ask that they have 1 year in recovery because our meetings can get real heavy. And, you know, parents are in really raw crisis, and it can trigger trauma for somebody that's in early recovery too, because Section 35, sometimes that gets brought up. Rape gets brought up, like things, very traumatic things can happen. And if someone's in really early recovery, that might really trigger them. So we'd rather them be in their own meetings. And then once they have at least a year, which is even still early, they are more than welcome to come back as a speaker if they'd like, or maybe just to come and visit with their loved one. But we'd rather have them come maybe to share hope. But yeah, it's really for the family and, you know, friends or loved ones of that person.
Okay. So there's not, so, because I was going to ask you, is there an age group, but there's not really
We would like them to be 18 or older.
Okay.
Because again, there's some things that can be brought up that can be really traumatic, especially if someone comes, which this happens way too often, but announces that somebody died, you know, in their family. So it's, you know, we don't want to traumatize a child. And, you know, we have grandparents raising grandchildren. We have so many different scenarios. Yeah. Yeah.
This is amazing. So you have over 200 people working with you. Are these volunteers or are they?
So we have 13 staff. We are funded by the Department of Public Health.
Okay.
We're also a nonprofit, but the nonprofit dollars never go to staff or salaries. And we don't do a lot of fundraising, but we do have a nonprofit side to us. But so we have 13 staff members. So that's how we're able to pay our staff and our rent for our office. And,
Sure.
you know, going all over the place doing resource work. And even though right now we're virtual. And then everyone else, it's volunteers. And the volunteerism that we have is incredible. Like when we have an event on a Saturday, for, you know, say the volunteer appreciation lunch that we do every year to show them that we appreciate them. They all come on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, but we have like a nice lunch, and because we want to thank them, and DPH wants to see them have some sort of self-care too, because let's face it, they're dealing with the same trauma the staff is at these meetings. I mean,
Secondary trauma. Yeah.
And it will,
Yeah, and-
the other
and
big
we're-
thing is
yeah, and we come from all walks. We're judges, doctors, teachers, you know, we're gay, we're straight, we're married, we're divorced. Like we come from every walk, but everyone just helps each other.
And I think the big thing is the volunteerism is, you know, you've got people that run the groups that have lost their kids, but they've been where somebody who's walking through the door has been. Or you have somebody who has kids that are in long-term recovery, but they've been where those people have been when they walk in the door. So part of AA, you know, and part of NA is when you're in recovery, you give back. And it's the same mentality. You want to give back. You want to know, you want to we parents who have kids that are in recovery or suffering from substance abuse, we are a family.
Yep.
That's it. Like, you know, my next door neighbor, she doesn't suffer from substance abuse. I don't know what her history is. She's not family, she's a friend. We don't talk the same language. At Learn to Cope, we talk the same language.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a safe place to be.
Well, how wonderful. I mean, how has it helped you? You were going to say something. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, go ahead. I can say it after.
How has it helped you as a person? How has this helped your personal, you know, your trauma that you were talking about earlier? How has this helped you as a person?
Well, I have to say, I don't think I would have gotten through a lot of the things that I've had to face personally. I'll tell you, I lost my niece 2 years ago to a fentanyl overdose.
It was right before the 31st.
Yeah, yes, that's right. You were there at that vigil.
She got up to speak at that vigil, and I don't even think you were
I was
you were present.
I was out of my mind with grief. She was like a daughter to me because she was my sister with the schizophrenia's daughter. So my mom and I kind of co-parented her. She was we, tried so hard for many years to help her trauma. And, she found the pill. The story. But I have to say, like, that really hit me hard. I mean, I've been through a lot like everybody else. But, I never knew years ago starting this what was going to happen in the future. Nobody does. But I have to tell you, the people that work with Learn to Cope, Kathy Day, Carrie Walsh, like all of our staff, they took such good care of me. Like, I was not good for a while. I was still obviously doing Learn to Cope and sort of running like a machine, I guess. But
Autopilot.
yeah, and she was on life support for 5 weeks. So I spent almost every day by her side in the hospital, and I slept overnight in the room some of the nights because I just didn't want her to be alone. But I knew what the outcome was going to be. It just was taking a long time. But I look back on it now, and I was kind of crazy. I was kind of losing it.
Don't you think it's because, and I'm not saying like we're the professionals, but like I look at myself when I help a family, I'm working with a family and their kids like in crisis and stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to count my blessings because I've been where they've been and I've got this. And it's like, you think that we think like our mind tricks us that we're going to be able to fix them. Ultimately, we know deep down inside, it's up to them. But our mind, we get into that drive. And now it directly affected your family and it's your family. And it's like, wait a minute, where did I go wrong? Like, it's your family. And it brings us back down to reality to say, no, we can't. You need to be reminded. You need to get grounded. Yeah, I mean, it took your legs out. We were all worried about you.
It took my legs right out from under me. I have to tell you, like, if it wasn't for all the girls and guys that work for Learn to Cope, so my office, I used to have a wall covered in obituaries because I had this process where whenever somebody's family member died, I would cut out the obituary and hang it on the wall. I didn't know, I didn't know what else to do, but I wanted, so I would hang them on the wall. And finally, like, I had this wall covered. So while I was there in the hospital with Janine, they removed all of them and, put them in like a safe place. They painted the walls of my office. They hung up like beautiful, like, sayings in my office, the starfish story. They went on my Facebook and sort of like printed out all my happy pictures of things, and they made these beautiful window frames with all my pictures in it. And I had no idea. They painted my office like a nice, really light blue color. They literally changed my office so that when I would come back, I wouldn't be looking at that wall anymore. And they wanted me to feel comfortable again. And it was one of the nicest things anyone has ever done for me in my life. Like, I was absolutely shocked when I walked into my office. But I guess what I'm saying is, if it wasn't for them and all the people I've met all these years, I mean, that's what has helped me heal. And I am really proud of, I'm okay with saying now that I'm really proud of what Learn to Cope is. And I never knew I was going to do anything like this. And I'm happy that when I do croak someday that I can say I left something good behind.
So if you could sum it up, because that was my next question. If you could sum up what Learn to Cope is all about, can you tie it up in a little bow? Like, how would you...
Essence?
Yeah.
In a bow.
Will you
leave me alone? We're getting close to Christmas time, okay?
So we're kind of a funny team. We, right now, I guess I'll describe what we're like right now because of COVID. We meet on Tuesdays and Fridays from like 10 to 12, and we all help each other and give each other advice on how to handle this situation or that situation. And we are just, I guess I'd like to wrap the team up in like a pretty little bow box, because I feel like we're all like a gift to each other, maybe. But then what we can do for each other, then that sort of emulates to everybody else.
Family. You're family.
Each other sane. Like we're like supervising each other, you know, just to make sure we're all okay and in check. So I guess what we are is just a bunch of good people that have almost all of us have been affected by this in some way, that are giving back to someone else. And we're lucky enough for this to be like, it's been my life's work now, I guess.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. If you could give people information about A, how they can volunteer, if you're looking for volunteers, B, where they can get in touch with you and learn more about the organization and how they can attend.
Sure. So the first thing you could do is visit the website, which is www.learn2cope.org. And if you scroll down on the main page, you can fill out a confidential registration form if you want to join a virtual meeting. The only requirement is to be a family member or a loved one. None of that information is shared outside. It's just so that we can figure out which meeting you should go to and which area of the state you're at. And then to be a volunteer, really, you just start going to meetings. And, you know, once you're familiar with the meeting, you know, one of us might approach you and ask you if you'd ever want to be a facilitator, or you just say, hey, I'm interested in being a facilitator. How do I go about that? Or we train you to be a Narcan trainer. A lot of our facilitators are also Narcan trainers. I think
Excellent.
There's 80 of them that are trained to be that.
Well, thank you, Joanne, for coming on. I really appreciate, we all really appreciate you coming on and sharing the great resources and the information and the great work you're doing, because we need people like you. And
there's a lot of good people out there helping people. It's not just Learn to Cope either, but I mean, that's what it's all about, like people just helping people. It was really nice to meet you, and
nice to meet you
again, Willie and Chris.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. And so that's our show for the week. Thank you to Mike Weber. And I don't know if you guys have any closing thoughts. Any closing thoughts, Willie? Chris?
Joanne, we're going to have to get Charlie and Finn together at some point in the spring or something.
That would be nice. I'm sure Finn would love that.
These are dogs, by the way.
These are
not
Pop and
kids.
Stomp and Golden.
We're friends.
Yeah,
That's
my dog was barking, actually, so maybe Bailey could come too.
Sure.
Yeah, bring her on. And yeah, Chris, any closing
I just
thoughts?
wanted to say that, like, whenever I have a family in crisis or very new to the game, Learn to Cope is where I direct them, because it's a great place to start.
And if you're saying it,
It's fine to say thank you, Chris.
Yep.
Chris is legit. So if she's saying it, it's
This is
Oh, I
legit.
picked on you, Andy.
what's that? What?
I said, even though I picked on you.
It's okay. So that's our show for the week. Thanks to Mike Weber, of course, who keeps the train moving. Thanks to Willie Drinkwater, Kristen Perry Long,
And you, Andy Burns.
and me. And that's
Thank you,
our show
Andy.
for-
Yes.
Well, thank you. And of course, Joanne Peterson. And that's our show for the week. Please visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/themap2020. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Guys.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
You too.